Thank you very much. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I'm very grateful to the witnesses for their insights. Dr. Perry, you talk about you've touched on a number of points. You know, when we think about China, Russia, and the United States as we move sort of from a clear American hegemony to a more multipolar world, depending on who you talk to, we think of China as being, you know, far to the west and Russia as being far to the east. And when we think about the United States, we think about our southern border. And in the Arctic, they're really all right there. They are our neighbors, and they are right across the ocean. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how the issues of how the defense and security requirements change when we look at these countries from our northern border instead of from our southern border, and what we need to do.
On a point that you mentioned, I think that Canada actually has a lot that we could potentially draw on from our American neighbors in Alaska that have already fielded there in a similar climate, a lot of the same kind of capability that we're looking to acquire. So I think there's a lot that we could draw on there. I think the basic issue that we need to be aware of is wherever we want to look at these potential threats on a map, that because of the geography and transpolar routes, they're more likely to be presenting a military challenge to North America over the pole. The same reason that when you fly east or west, you tend to go through parts of the Arctic. It's the same flight path that a missile would take, more or less, because it's faster and it's a more direct route. So irrespective of what latitude most of China is on, if they wanted to take military action towards North America, it is likely to come through the Arctic. The same thing applies to Russia. And then beyond that, because the North and their Arctic is important for the Russian economy, the Russians are really deploying a lot of assets there. They're making significant investments there. So they've positioned a lot of what for them are strategic forces that could be used anywhere in the world, and they are just already positioned in their north, which further increases the likelihood that they might be used in a way that would come over the pole and therefore through Canadian Arctic territory.
So just to follow up on that, in your opening remarks, you talked about Canada being behind. How far behind are we? Are we behind? And is it, how far behind are we on critical minerals? How far behind are we on mining? How far behind are we in terms of our defense capabilities? And if you have any insight on what we need to do to speed it up, I'd love to hear it.
So on the Russian front in particular, they started reinvesting in a lot of these capabilities with northern application close to 20 years ago. So I think maybe waiting 5 years or 10 years to be certain that that was a trajectory that was certain to be a problem. We could have maybe had a little leeway for about half the time that it's taken us to really kick into gear to start responding. But I think at this point we're well overdue. In terms of things that we could do, I think there are a number. Part of it, as we discussed earlier, we have a tendency to be extraordinarily Canadian and wanting to have competitive environments in all circumstances. I think there's a lot of environments in where it doesn't make any sense to create a competition just for the sake of having one. So making more decisions on a sole source basis would be smart. There's a number of other things that we should do. I think we're trying to do a lot at the same time. We're undertaking the most comprehensive military modernization effort since we rearmed for the Korean War. And I think we're doing so with a government of Canada administrative apparatus and bureaucracy that's a little heavier than it was in the early 1950s. Until we can change that, I think we need to make priorities, and I think one of the priorities that we should make is on focusing our efforts on Arctic capability, both for our own reasons as well as because I think it's an opportunity to have a constructive discussion with the U.S. administration and do something that they want.
And I'd just like to get one more question in there, which is in terms of flashpoints. You know, one of the things that we really talk about a lot off the coast of British Columbia is fish and the ocean warming. And the fish are moving north. So there's fish, there's trade, there's defense, there's land. Where do you think the flashpoints are most likely to happen just in terms of the current configuration?
I think it's hard to predict. It's hard to predict where a specific flashpoint would occur. I think the key thing is that we need to focus on what would be the most impactful threats. Concerns over fishing would have to take a number of different steps to become concerning. The most recent disputes we've had over fishing have been with key allies. So the likelihood that those evolve into something we don't want to see happen is perhaps less, depending on who is actually doing the fishing. I would say, though, having said that, there's a number of countries, and China in particular, employs non-state assets, fishing vessels in particular, in ways that make it difficult to figure out whether or not those vessels are acting independently or whether or not they're acting as an arm of the Chinese government in a sense. So we need to be mindful of those things, but I think the core priority should be focused on conventional military threats because we have so far to go in terms of adequately preparing for our own defense.
Thank you.